The first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make the noodles, and we're going to make them from flour and eggs, and we're going to start. So you want to pour the flour on your board. You can also use regular noodles if you would like. I just enjoy making the noodles. It's kind of fun. And so what I do with the eggs, the flour, I make a little well on the counter, and then I take my egg and I break. Oh, that's a double egg. Woo! That's exciting. And so so that's the first one. And so you can do it one of two ways. You can just start with a fork and use those eggs, and you're kind of going to pull the flour in from the sides and continue to stir it up. There's egg number 2. You just keep mixing it up. You can do this with your hands as well, but because it's so new early in the process, the flour and the egg get all over your hands, and it's kind of easier to do it like this to begin with. These are fresh eggs. We got them here and locally. Pull up on the side of the road and pay $5 and pick up a dozen eggs. It's awesome. Egg number 3. And the double egg yolk is really good for me today because a couple of these were small and I was worried it wasn't going to be enough, so I'm really happy with the way this is looking so far. So you just keep pulling this in, keep adding, and I can tell I'm going to need all 4 of the eggs. So it's when you're making pasta, it's 100 grams of flour, which I had measured before we started this, to 1 egg. So if you want to make 1 serving, it's 1 egg and 100 grams of flour. And then I'm going to break this next one in. And after this, I'm going to start with my hands because I like the way it feels better. You just keep mixing and mixing. At this point, I'm going to just start mixing some of this in with my hand. There's a feel for it. And just keep pulling that flour in. Folding and folding. It's a lot like bread dough. And there's a feel for this as you go along. Like, I don't, right at this moment, I'm not sure I'm going to need all of this flour, but you kind of as you go through, you'll feel you want a nice silky looking dough. And when I get to the point that I feel like I'm making some progress with this dough, I just move the flour over and pull it in as I go along. When it starts sticking to my hands, I just add more. It's a dough scraper or counter scraper, or I mean, I use this for a lot of different things, but it's nice to get that counter cleaned up so you can tell where you are with the dough, because if it sticks to the counter, you know you're not quite there yet. And generally speaking, this process takes at least 10 minutes. Get it mixed up, and then you have to knead it. And as you knead it, you can feel the difference. It starts turning into this silky, kind of stretchier dough. Like, I can feel it right now. See, it's not sticking to my hands at all. We're nowhere near where it needs to be, but just, it's kind of, you can zen out. And normally by this time I do have some dough and flour on my hands. But normally by this point, if I had just done it all by hand, my hands would have been totally covered and I would have had to stop and go wash them off because it drives me crazy. And so we just knead. Feeling a little sticky still. And there are some days when I'm doing this that amount of flour wouldn't have been enough, and it just depends on, I don't know, the air and what's going on with the humidity. So I've been kneading this for about 10 minutes, and the dough, as you can see, is kind of a nice, I don't want to stop because it dries out quite quickly, but it's absorbed all of the flour that the eggs could handle. So I had two choices. I could keep going, or I could have gotten probably another egg, maybe an egg and a half, and added it to this and mix that flour in. If I had company coming, that's what I would have done. But what I'm going to do is make the ragu. It's going to be a little bit too much for this amount of dough, but I'm going to freeze it and have it at another date and make another batch of pasta. So this is ready to rest. And so what you want to do with this at this point is just wrap it in some saran wrap and put it in the refrigerator, or let it rest on the counter if you're going to use it, which I am, so I'll leave it on the counter. But you just want it to rest and let it do its job in there, absorbing all that flour and kind of loosening up a bit. It's easier to use. So that's where we'll go at this point. Now we're moving on to the ragu. The pasta is resting, and the first thing we're going to do is cut up our vegetables and the pancetta that needs to go in. So we'll start with the vegetables. I find it easier to break things like this into usable pieces, and when you're cutting things, just be really careful. I'm kind of weird, but when I am cutting them, I do one thing at a time. So I'm going to take all the pieces and cut them into the same length, move them over here, and you can also do the celery like this, which is probably easier, whatever works for you. And then I just line everything up. Make sure your fingers are folded under, and I just chop gently to get those all kind of the same size. You want them, these are going to saute in the pan and make, I think this is called a sofretto, which is not the right Italian accent, but it's just, what you're doing with this ragu is you're building flavor, and this is part of the flavor profile. So there's the celery, and then you do the same thing with the carrot. Get these pieces. What I'm doing here is I'm actually holding this together with my little finger and my thumb, and then putting my hands bent under to hold it all together so that I can be basically lazy, and I don't like to do 16 steps over and over again. And if you don't like the size, then that's when I just kind of chop away to make them the same size. So now this is your onion. This is a good lesson for every time you're using an onion. I find it easier done this a zillion different ways, but I find it easier when you're working with an onion that you're going to chop up to cut off this end, leave this end alone. That's going to hold your onion together. I then cut that in half, and then I peel each half separately because it seems to be easier than peeling off. And of course, I like to see if I can get it off in one piece because it's fun. And then do the same thing. So if you have a task, I usually generally do the task for every piece and then go back and do the next task for that onion. So the next piece of this is to chop this onion, and I want them that size. And so when I look at my onion, I make sure your fingers are on the top, and I take the knife and I go down through, and I don't go all the way to the end. I just make sure that I've left a little bit so that it's still all holding together. Okay, and so now I've got these layers, and then I'm going to do the same thing the other way. And on this one, I just keep my fingers carefully placed like this and chop down through, trying to make them all the same size. And then I take it once again, and I'm holding it with my pinky and my thumb and folding my fingers over so I don't chop them off. And then just do the best you can to hold it together. Then I get to the end and I kind of hold on to this little piece here to kind of keep it together. Then I cut off that little piece. Do the same thing again. And then I'll just leave that one. Okay, so now I've got basically the same size. I don't like big pieces for everything. So that's chopped up nicely. And then this is actually an Italian salami. Didn't have any pancetta. Bacon would work here. Prosciutto. Whatever you want. Once again, we're building flavor, and as long as it smells like it would add a nice taste to the meal, so I just say, that works. And then I just chop this into little pieces as well. I think it's prosciutto, but I'm not sure. I'm not Italian, but okay. Okay, so now we're going to go over to our stove, and everything else I have poured out the wine and the cream, and I'll let you know as we go along the amounts that I'm using. But basically, ragu is a meat sauce, and so you want the meat to shine in this, and there are other things that you make with the same combination. It's the basis for a lot of Italian food. And sometimes you use more of this than not. But this time, because we're trying to let the meat shine, we're going to just use one of each. Okay, so I'm going to go over here and I'm going to heat this pan up, and we're going to saute all of this together. Okay, so now we're going to take the pancetta and put it in the pan. The oil has been heating up here for a minute. Yeah, that sounds a little hot to me, so I turn the heat down a little bit to keep adjusting the heat as you go along. And we just want this to brown up and crisp up a little bit. And once again, this is just, don't be afraid to pull your pan away from the stove if you feel like things are from the heat, if you feel like things are a little too hot. And then just wait until it gets down. Turn your burner down to low and then work from there to get that up. But this, we just want this to turn crispy. A little bit. This again is a matter of taste. I like to get it a little bit not caramelized, it doesn't caramelize, but kind of brown and get that some of that flavor, that temperature in there. And then I just watch it for a little bit. Any pan will do. If it's a non-stick, it might be a good place to start. Sometimes that fond builds up in there and it's easier to take care of it when you've got a non-stick pan, but you can use any pan for this as long as it holds all of your ingredients. So this needs to cook probably another minute, and then it's turning, I don't know if you can see this, but it's turning a little bit crispy on the sides, and I like to make sure that it's all, I see a little bit of that because that does add a nice rich flavor to the sauce. Okay, the next thing we're going to do, we're going to keep that going for just a minute, is add the vegetables, and I can pick this up and just drag it over there, but once again, I'm just going to take this and put it in, using my knife as a scraper. Be very careful doing this. And then this is going to take about 10 minutes. We are going to stir this, get all that oil, and then we're going to saute this until they're not overly tender, but you're going to break this down so that this is another added flavor. You don't want this to be the star of the dish. You just want this to be cooked enough before you put the meat in so that it kind of meshes in with everything and you don't notice this. But it's definitely something that needs to be in there. Like I said, I'm sticking to the recipe today. Once you figure out how you like this to taste, you can add anything you want to here, some spices, fennel or garlic. But I'm taking this to the most simple place that you can take it, and then the next time you make it, you can add flavors as you so desire. And this is very tasty because any ragu that you cook, we're making a ground beef ragu with pork today, but you want to keep building the flavors, and it all has to cook for no less than 2.5 hours. This one would probably go about 2.5 hours to 3 hours, and when you're using the larger chunks of meat, you can go anywhere from 3 to 4, 5, 6 hours. So. Okay, so we'll come back in about 10 minutes. Okay, so here we are. We've broken, this is good for me. It's broken down enough so that the next step is I'm going to add the meat. This is about a pound of hamburger and about a little over a pound. I had a little bit more pork than hamburger, but like this is going in with the hamburger. And now you just want to cook this. And then you just stir this like you would any scrambled hamburger and just mix it all in. And make sure that gets cooked through so that it gets to a point where you definitely can't form a hamburger anymore. Okay, so this is cooked down so that it's definitely, you can't shape a burger anymore. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to take your wine, and this is about a half a cup of wine, and you're going to put that in there, and you're going to let that simmer off so that the alcohol is gone, but the taste gets in there. Just want to let that go for probably 3 minutes. Just make sure that it's all stirred in. And then I'm going to add some tomato puree to this. You can take whole tomatoes and grind them up if you want to for a little more chunky. You grind them up as much as you want. This has an excellent flavor, and so I, generally speaking, use this when I'm trying to make something as authentic tasting as possible. It's awesome. And so I'm going to use about half of this. This is 700, a little bit more than half. It's probably 400 grams. Stir that in. Remember, the star of this dish is the meat. So we put that in. We'll let that, get that all stirred up. And then I'm going to turn the heat down just a little bit. And the next thing that goes in is a couple of bay leaves. I'll stir those in a minute. And then I'm going to flavor this one with the nutmeg. And you can do nutmeg. You can put, this is to taste. There's no measurement for this. You put a little bit of nutmeg in. When you're cooking like this, start small. You can always add more. You can use, I'm going to use actually fresh nutmeg, but you can use regular nutmeg, and you just sprinkle in until you like the taste of the nutmeg. If you don't like nutmeg, you can add fennel, or there are other things, but this particular recipe calls for nutmeg, so we're going to do that. And I'm just going to grate some of this nutmeg in. I've made this before, so I know kind of, but if I were just starting out, that's about what I would add. And I would stir everything in. You can add that nutmeg anytime, so I'm just going to leave it right there for a moment. The one deviation I am going to make from the recipe today, just because I make this frequently, is that I'm just going to add the rind of Parmesan Regaggio to just put it in. You're going to take that and the bay leaves out at the end. But like I said, we're adding a little bit of depth of flavor here, and so I just like it in there. It does add a nice, it just adds a nice richness to it. So that will all get mushy and you won't even recognize it when it comes out. And so this recipe, there was a huge debate with ragu and bolognese, but ragu is to whether or not milk or cream is supposed to be part of the recipe. And I've made it both ways. If you don't put milk or cream in, it's got a very acidic, yummy taste. If you put the milk in, it sweetens it up a little bit. And so today I have decided to go with the milk. You just add a little bit at a time. You're going to use this as this cooks to kind of keep this juicy enough as you're cooking for the next 2.5 hours. You want to pour this in extremely slowly so that it doesn't break. But I've got 2/3 of a cup here, and I'm going to use about 1/3 of it right now. It changes the color of the whole dish. But as you go along, you'll see that continually change colors. And then the last thing we're going to add, we're going to keep this and add as we need it. The last thing we're going to add is some salt. And once again, I just start off with a couple of pinches of salt, and this is to taste. So once I know this meat is completely cooked through, I'm going to taste this for both salt. I'm going to add a little bit of pepper. And then I'm going to test this for the nutmeg and the salt and pepper. Yum! It smells so good. Okay, now I need to just taste that little bit of that. I'm just going to taste the sauce. I'm not going to... Oh my gosh, that's so good. It does need more salt and more nutmeg, so I'm going to add... Oh my word, that is so yummy. another spoon and give it another taste. You can adjust this anytime as you go along. Okay, I'm going to leave that alone for a little while, and that is going to take, I'm going to leave that going until I'm happy with it, but it will probably be about 2.5 to 3 hours, so we will be back. Okay, so we're back, and this is the ragu. It's done. It tastes great. I added the rest of the milk as we went through, and kept it going for 2.5 hours, and it came out great. It tastes wonderful. So now we're going to talk about rolling out the dough. So I've put the water on for the pasta. Sometimes you can save this pasta when you make it. I'll show you how I do it if you wanted to save it, or save it for later, or you can put it in, shortly as you're making it. This dough looks great. I strained the flour that I was using and got all the chunks out of it, and I'm going to use that for the board here. Now, the thing about this dough is it gets dried out quickly, so you have to just kind of cover it if you walk away. So it is going to require some more flour to keep it from sticking, and this is the rolling part of this. All right, so there's many ways to do this. The real experts roll it around their rolling pin, and I haven't quite mastered that yet. So I will show you what I have figured out, from watching videos and talking to people and practice, is that if you put this on the counter and you just start turning it a 1/4 degree each time it will maintain its circular shape, and you want it to do that for as long as you can until it gets until it gets the length of your rolling pin. And you want this to be kind of see-through. Because the ragu is heavy, I am shooting for probably a thicker noodle than I would for something else, but this is another one of those Zen things. You just keep rolling, and you can't imagine how big this little piece of dough is going to become. I've watched videos where people go like that, and that does help because it keeps the pressure on the whole piece even, but I'm not great at that yet either. But I just keep working on it so that I get better and better. And what I'm saying is they roll it up something like this, and then I don't dare to do it because it feels like it's all going to squish together. When I first started doing this, I was shocked at how it feels. It holds together quite well. It doesn't, unless you roll it out and pull on it really hard, it doesn't tear. It's just the coolest dough. it starts getting too big, it's all right to hang it off the edge. The weight of this eventually helps stretch it out. The only problem doing it this way is that if you aren't careful and you pick up your rolling pin, the whole thing will fall on the floor. So you have to be really careful when you're doing this. Any creases in it. I just want it as smooth as possible. So now I'm going to roll it a half turn because I'm getting to the end of my rolling pin and it's easier to keep it all the same width. If you can put even pressure on and not pick it up and switch it, you can do it any way you want, but this is the best way I've learned to do it. So, I don't know if you can see this. I'll pick it up a little bit. It's starting to get, I don't know if you can see that. It's starting to get a little bit see-through so I can see the lines under the counter right here. And I'm thinking, I'm pretty close to where I want to be with this because I want a heavier noodle, but I'm gonna go one more time around, I think. See, if I let go of this, it would fall on the floor right at the moment. All right, so I'm going to just give it one more push on this angle. Okay, and in order to keep this from sticking to itself, I'm going to sprinkle the top with a little bit of flour. And at this point, you can just take a knife and cut. I did learn something recently where you fold it up to the middle. that. I've never done it this way, so we'll see. And then you fold it in half, and then you cut it that way. And this calls for tagliatelle, a thicker pasta. I'm going to make it a little thinner because I like it a little better that way, but you can do it any way you want to. I try to keep them all about the same size. Then pick them up, and you can pick them up more than one at a time. Water is rolling, boiling. I'm going to turn it down just for a minute. Okay, and then you just keep going. This is the most fun thing to do. I know it looks like a lot of work, but it's really just, if you have the time, you can make it today and put it in the refrigerator for tomorrow and do, you know, make anything you want, pasta dish as far as vegetables or anything. But it's just, homemade noodles are just the best. Okay, so I'm going to have this be, I'll cook the rest of them in a minute, but I'm going to cover that, as always when you always want to cover your noodles, your pasta when you're not using it. So basically my water is going, I do add quite a bit of salt to that. And I haven't done that yet, so I'll just put probably 2 tablespoons at least in this pasta water. And then once that's boiling really hard, I just pick up a bundle of the noodles and put them in the water. And I use a set of tongs, make sure it's not sticking to each other. Put a little bit more in, I think I can get in there. And this does not take long to cook. Okay, we'll keep cutting while that's, I would say about 3 minutes at the most. If you want to put these in the refrigerator and save them for later, a nice way to do that is to nest them. Make sure the ends are inside, and as long as they're floured, you can drop them in the water just like that. Okay, so I test this. Take a look at it, and then I just rip off a little piece and see if I like the way it's cooked. That is not quite done. So we'll just leave that. We'll keep. So because I'm not going to use all of this right now, I'm going to take this out. I'm going to use that much right now. See what we come up with here. And the nice thing about this recipe is that the pasta water is so starchy. It's actually good. So you put this in directly into the pot. And then take it out. You've got your meat sauce ragu and some homemade noodles. Thank you. Thank you very much.